Robin set her coffee down on the wrong side of her laptop and didn't notice until it left a ring on her notepad. She picked up the mug, moved it 2 inches, and went back to the story she was rewriting for the 3rd time that morning. The piece was about Hartford's municipal water contract. Not glamorous, not the kind of thing that won awards. But Robin had found a thread in the procurement records that nobody else had pulled, and she was pulling it until something came loose. That was how she worked. Patient, methodical, a little relentless. Her editor at the Hartford Courier, Theo Lindqvist, called it her best quality and her worst one, depending on the day. Her phone buzzed. She ignored it. Outside the window of the Courier's 3rd-floor office, November was doing what November does in Hartford. Gray sky, bare trees. A wind that came off the river like it had somewhere to be. Robin kept her eyes on the screen. The phone buzzed again. She picked it up. A text from Mark Lunch? Osteria Bianca. I have news. She smiled before she put the phone back down. That was the thing about Mark. He still texted like they were dating. Still made a small event out of a Tuesday. She typed back, 1 o'clock. Don't be late. He sent a single thumbs up, which made her laugh out loud alone in the office, loud enough that the intern 2 desks over looked up. Robin shook her head and went back to the water contract. She had been at the Courier for 6 years, and she was good at the job in a way that was visible even to people who didn't read newspapers. Sources called her back. Documents arrived without being requested. A city councilman had once crossed a hotel lobby to apologize to her, unprompted, for something he hadn't even been caught doing yet. Theo had watched the whole thing from 20 feet away and told her afterward that she made people nervous in the most useful possible way. 2 years earlier, the network offer had come in. A producer from a national cable outlet had sat across from Robin at a lunch that wasn't Osteria Bianca, somewhere nicer, somewhere with a tablecloth, and laid out a package that included a salary that would have changed the shape of their lives. Robin had asked for a week to think about it. She had taken 4 days. She had said no. Mark's agency, Cascade Analytics, had been in trouble. Not obvious trouble, not the kind you could see from the outside, but the books were bleeding quietly, and he was working 18-hour days to keep it from showing. She had gone through the numbers with him on a Saturday morning, both of them at the kitchen table with coffee going cold, and she had understood before he finished explaining. She had also understood that he would never ask her to turn down the network for him, which was exactly why she did it. She had spent the following 3 months making calls. Quiet ones, carefully placed, drawing on relationships she'd built over a decade of covering business and civic affairs in Hartford. She connected Cascade Analytics with 2 mid-size clients who had been looking for an agency with a strong local footprint. She vouched for Mark personally to a contact at Vanguard Community Bank when the refinancing paperwork stalled. She never told him exactly how many calls she made or exactly whose arm she had gently bent. She didn't do it for credit. She did it because it needed doing. Cascade Analytics had its best revenue year 18 months later. Osteria Bianca smelled like garlic and old wood and the particular warmth of a restaurant that has been open long enough to mean something to people. Robin got there at 1, and Mark was already at the table, which almost never happened. He stood when he saw her, which he still did, which she still liked. "You're early," she said. "I'm never early. You're standing here." He pulled her chair out. "I'm a changed man." She sat. He sat across from her, and she looked at him the way she rarely took time to look at him anymore. Actually looked. The way you look at something you've stopped noticing because it's always there. He was wearing the gray jacket she'd bought him for his birthday. He'd gotten a haircut since she'd last paid attention. He looked, she thought, like a man who was doing well. There was something easy in the way he was sitting. His shoulders were down. "What's the news?" she said. He poured her water from the carafe without being asked. Cascade's been shortlisted for the Drummond Group account. She picked up her water glass. The Drummond Group. Regional finalist. Decision comes in December. Mark, I know. That's significant. I know. He was grinning now, not the polished professional smile he used in meetings, but the other one. The slightly crooked one that had been the same since she'd met him at a journalism conference 11 years ago. When he had been on the ad side panel and she had disagreed with something he said, and he had leaned into the microphone and said, "I think you're right. I wanted to tell you in person." She set down her glass. "We should celebrate. That's what lunch is. I mean, actually celebrate. Dinner somewhere. Jonah's at my mother's this weekend. I already made the reservation," he said. "Saturday night. 8 o'clock. She looked at him across the table. The restaurant was filling up around them. Plates moving, voices rising, the ordinary noise of a Tuesday afternoon in Hartford. Mark was watching her with the expression of a man who understood that he was lucky. "You already made it," she said. "The Roosevelt Arms has a new place on the ground floor. Supposed to be excellent." She nodded slowly. Something in her chest did the thing it had been doing since she was 28 and first understood that she had found a person she wanted to build things with. A kind of specific, localized warmth that never got old because she had learned not to take it for granted. "Okay," she said. Saturday. Their food arrived. They ate. They talked about Jonah's school play, about a piece Robin was working on, about nothing in particular. Mark flagged down the waiter and ordered dessert without asking, because he already knew she'd want the olive oil cake. And he was right. She drove back to the office at 2:15 with the windows cracked even though it was cold, because she was in the kind of mood that wanted a little air. She was already composing her next question for the water contract story. She had a source meeting at 4. Life was full and familiar and hers. The ring her coffee mug had left on her notepad was still there when she sat back down at her desk. She picked up her pen and circled it without thinking, then crossed it out, then started writing. Robin pushed through the glass doors of the Courier building at 2:47 p.m., her notepad tucked under her arm. The coffee ring had dried to a faint brown halo by the time she reached her desk on the 3rd floor. She set the pad down again, same corner, same spot. A habit. A marker. The water contract story needed another paragraph before 4 o'clock. She'd been on it for 3 weeks. Bid rigging, subcontractors getting favors, the usual Hartford machinery turning. Theo wanted it by Thursday. She pulled up her notes, skimmed the municipal filing she'd obtained through a records request, and started typing. At 3:15, her phone buzzed. She didn't check it immediately. The source meeting was coming up. She wanted to be sharp, to remember the names. The chain of who knew what when. She looked down at the screen. A message from Mark, coming to the office. Need to grab some files from home back in 20. She read it twice. Mark never came to the Curry building. He had no reason to. Everything he needed was at Cascade's office on Chapel Street, 6 blocks north. Robin typed back. Why the response took 40 seconds, left my laptop. Working through some Drummond stuff tonight. She set the phone face down on her desk. Saturday dinner at the Roosevelt Arms sat in her calendar. She could see the corner of it if she glanced at her screen. 8 o'clock. He'd mentioned that at lunch, his hand on the breadbasket, that particular kind of careful. We should do this. Celebrate a little. The Drummond shortlist was good news. The kind of good news that gets celebrated. She remembered the olive oil cake, how he'd ordered it without asking, and something in that gesture, the presumption of her wanting it, the ease of it, seemed suddenly like the easiest lie. She shook it off. The Drummond Group pitch was a big deal. Of course he was working on it tonight. Of course he needed files. None of this was strange. At 3:28, she heard the elevator chime on her floor. Mark stepped out wearing the gray jacket. Not the one she'd bought him. The other one. The wool one. Newer. He'd worn it twice since Christmas. He was carrying his messenger bag. The leather one. the one he took to client meetings. "Hey," he said. "Hi, thought you left it at home." "I did. Coming back from Chapel Street. Figured I'd swing by, grab it, and then I'm heading back to meet." He stopped. Shifted his weight. "I'm heading back to the office. They're all there. Cramming for the pitch." Robin nodded. She didn't get up. She could see sweat at his temple, barely visible. Not much. Just enough to catch if you were looking, and she was looking now. December in Hartford was cold. The walk from Chapel Street to the Courier Building was 7 minutes. That wasn't enough to warm up that much. "Which files?" she asked. "The media analysis stuff. From Vanguard. The breakdown of their customer base." He was already walking toward her cubicle, not quite meeting her eyes. "You know, the one we ran last month." She didn't move. "Vanguard? For the Drummond pitch?" "Yeah, they want to see how we segment different client profiles. Consumer demographics. It's smart thinking on Grady's part. Shows we understand market composition." He was talking too much. Mark didn't talk too much. "The Vanguard analysis is on your server at home," Robin said. "I remember because you sent it to me by mistake in December. I forwarded it back to you." Right, yes, he was at the filing cabinet now, opening the top drawer with a sound like a drawer sliding open, metal catching. "But I also have a hard copy here, from when I was reviewing it last week. I think it's in the second drawer. I came by to grab it." She watched him move through the drawers. He wasn't finding anything. His hands were moving the folders, but not the way someone moves folders when they're looking for a specific file. More like someone moving them to move them. To have something to do with his hands while he was standing in this room, lying in front of his wife. "Found it," he said. He was holding a blue folder, not the Vanguard folder. The Vanguard folder was green. Robin looked away. She pulled her keyboard toward her, started typing a sentence she'd already written. She heard him move back out into the aisle. She heard him pause. "The source meeting?" he asked. 4 o'clock. "Good, that's good." He shifted the strap of his messenger bag. "I'll let you work." After he left, Robin sat with her hands on the keyboard for 6 minutes. The water contract story was halfway done. The coffee ring on her notepad had dried completely by now, invisible unless you knew to look for it. She pulled up her calendar on her phone and checked the dinner reservation at the Roosevelt Arms again, just to make sure it was real, that she hadn't imagined Saturday, that something solid was still scheduled. At 3:51, she closed the water contract document without saving. She opened her web browser instead and typed, Nico Belandi. The results came back in 0.2 of a second. There were 7 of them. Nico Belandi Architecture, Nico Belandi Fashion, Nico Belandi Consulting. She clicked on Fashion. A photograph loaded. A woman in her early 40s, dark hair, sharp cheekbones, wearing a cream-colored blazer against a white background. Nico Belandi, founder and creative director. The bio said she'd worked for 3 major fashion houses before launching her own line in 2015. The line was called Belandi Collective, mostly workwear, structured blazers and trousers in neutral tones. Robin closed the tab. There was no reason for Mark to know that name. There was no reason for her to have known to look it up. She didn't know why her hands had typed it out. Muscle memory without the memory. Her fingers moving faster than her thoughts. At 3:59, her phone vibrated. A text from her source, running 5 minutes late. Sorry, Robin slipped her notepad under her arm and headed for the stairwell. The coffee ring would still be there tomorrow, faint and dry. A mark of nothing. A stain that meant nothing. A proof of nothing at all. Robin's source never texted back. She waited in the stairwell for 8 minutes, phone in hand, before climbing back to 3. The meeting had been scheduled for weeks. Hartford Consolidated's former purchasing director, willing to go on record about the bid rigging. She called. Straight to voicemail. She texted again. Nothing. She dropped into her desk chair at 4:09 p.m. Water contract scattered across her desk beside the coffee ring that had dried to a perfect brown outline on her notepad. The deadline was Thursday. Theo would want an update by end of day tomorrow. She opened her laptop to begin the reporting calls. Her fingers stalled above the keyboard. Mark had lied about the file. She pulled up her email archive and opened the message from December, the Vanguard analysis he'd supposedly needed. 12 pages, color-coded spreadsheets, his signature on the cover memo. It was on his home server. It had been on his home server in December. He would have known that. He worked from home twice a week. He knew exactly where his files lived. Robin opened a browser and typed Nico Bellondi again, then navigated through the Bellondi Collective website. A collection launch event. Featured in several design publications. One of them was Harbor, the quarterly design magazine published out of Portland. She clicked through to their events calendar. The launch was tonight. 6 p.m. at the Meridian Gallery on Federal Street, 3 blocks from the Courier building. She was listed in the contributor directory. She'd written 2 pieces for them on sustainable manufacturing in Portland. The kind of work that kept her byline alive between major stories. Harbor sent contributor alerts. She scrolled through her emails. There it was, flagged at 2:47 p.m. The exact moment she'd arrived at the building. We'd love to have you cover the Bellondi Collective launch tonight. Informal crowd, major players in regional fashion and design. Drinks and exhibition from 6 to 8. Let us know. She hadn't seen it. Her inbox had been open to work email only. She closed the tab and sat very still. Mark had come to the building at 3:15. He'd stayed 11 minutes. He'd taken a blue folder from a filing cabinet that didn't contain client work. It contained archived story files, background research, things from cases long closed. He'd been sweating. He'd talked too much. He'd left carrying something he didn't need. Robin grabbed her bag and stood. The Meridian Gallery occupied the corner of Federal and Church, all floor-to-ceiling glass and white walls. Inside, the space was crowded with the deliberate casual of people who'd paid attention to what they wore. She kept her bag across her body and moved to the left side of the room, where a series of photographs hung along the wall. Bellondi Collective workwear displayed on models in industrial spaces. She didn't look for them. She moved through the crowd with a reporter's invisibility, the small notebook already in her hand, and she positioned herself near the gallery's back corner where the refreshment table stood. That was where she saw them. They stood near the entrance to the back room, partially screened by a partition wall but not hidden. Mark was in his gray jacket. The woman beside him was Nico Bellondi, sharp cheekbones, dark hair swept to one side, wearing a white linen shirt that hung from her shoulders like something she'd forgotten she was wearing. Robin didn't move. Nico said something, and Mark's head tilted toward her. Not a glance. A tilt that meant he was already leaning in her direction, that his body had already made its choice about where to be. Nico's hand rose to his chest. Not a touch, not quite. A pause, her palm flat, her fingers spread across the gray wool jacket. The jacket Robin had bought him. The gesture lasted 2 seconds. Maybe 3. Then Nico stepped closer. Mark's arm crossed her back. Not a guide. Not a steering touch. His hand settled at her waist. His fingers curved against the line of her body in a way that said he'd done this before, that muscle memory was doing the work, that he knew exactly how her shape fit against his hand. Her head dropped to his shoulder. She stayed there. He didn't move. His other hand came up, and he tilted his face into her hair, and he breathed. It wasn't a kiss. It was worse. Robin didn't blink. She didn't look away. She watched his eyes close. She watched her husband disappear into someone else, his hand pressing slightly against the back of Nico Bellondi's waist, his face buried in dark hair. And she understood that she was watching something that had learned how to live in the dark. something practiced. Something that had been happening for long enough that it had stopped feeling like a choice. She turned and walked to the exit. The street air hit her face, cold and October sharp. She didn't feel it. She didn't feel her hands. She walked north on Federal toward the Courier building without looking at anything. And she didn't cry. Her chest was tight in a way that had nothing to do with breathing. She climbed to 3 and sat at her desk. The coffee ring was still there. The water contract was still there. Her notepad with its perfect brown outline sat where she'd left it. Robin opened a new browser window and searched for family law attorneys in Portland. She wrote down 5 names. She crossed out 2. She opened a blank document and began to write down everything she knew about Mark's business accounts, his insurance policies, his retirement fund. Her hands were steady. Her fingers found the keys without hesitation. By 5:47 p.m., she had a list. By 6:15 p.m., she had Trevor Hastings' number saved in her phone, marked as a personal contact. She didn't call. Not yet. She sat in her desk chair in the quiet office and waited for the anger to arrive. But it didn't come. What came instead was colder and infinitely more useful. What came was clarity. What came was the understanding that she had already made her choice, and everything that followed would simply be the machinery of executing it. Robin picked up her phone at 6:22 p.m. and did not put it down for 11 minutes. She sat at her desk with the dried coffee ring on the notepad beside her, the office half empty, and the overhead lights doing what they always did after 6. Losing interest. The water contract draft was open on her screen. She hadn't touched it in 40 minutes. Trevor Hastings' number was already saved. She looked at it the way you look at a door you know you're going to open, taking one last account of the hallway. Then, she called. He answered on the second ring. His voice was direct, without being cold, and she gave him the facts in the same register. Marriage, 6 years, assets held jointly, 1 son, an affair she had witnessed herself. He asked one question about whether there was a prenuptial agreement. There wasn't. He said he had an opening Thursday morning at 9. She said she'd be there. She ended the call and set the phone face down on the desk. The office around her kept making its sounds. A printer somewhere, a door, someone's chair rolling back, and none of it reached her. She was aware of Mark at dinner right now, probably at the Roosevelt Arms without her, or somewhere else, his arm crossing a back that was not hers. The gray jacket she had picked from a rack in November, holding it up in the store light to check the stitching along the collar. She had spent 20 minutes deciding. She turned her chair slightly away from the window and opened a new document. She worked until 8:40. Not on the water contract. She worked the way she always worked a difficult story, methodically, without drama, one document at a time. The Vanguard email from December was already open in a second tab. She'd forwarded it to her personal account in October when she'd first started keeping a quiet record of things she couldn't explain. And the timestamp confirmed it, saved months before tonight, before any of this had a name. She pulled up the Harbor Magazine contributor alert from 2:47 p.m. and forwarded that too. She wasn't building a case. She was organizing facts. She had been doing it her whole career, and she was good at it, and the steadiness of it kept her hands from doing anything else. The Belandi Collective launch had started at 6. She had been 3 blocks away. She'd stood at the edge of the Meridian Gallery's entrance and watched through the glass panel beside the main door, which was propped open and attended by a woman in a headset who hadn't looked at her. Inside, 100 people in architectural clothing moved through white-lit space. The music was low and European. Robin had registered the room in the way she always registered a room: exits, density, where the light was concentrated. And then she had found him. He was in the gray jacket. Nico Belandi was in white linen with her dark hair loose, and Mark's arm was around her waist in the way that people stand when no one is watching, casual and total, the practiced weight of it. His face was turned into her hair with his eyes closed. Not a greeting. Not a moment. A habit. Robin had stood there for exactly as long as she needed to. Then she'd walked back 3 blocks in the cooling air, gone upstairs, and started working. The piece on the Belandi Collective launch ran Friday morning. Robin filed it at 10:14 Thursday night and emailed Anson Pereira with the note contributed for Harbor's digital edition. Heads up in case anyone calls. Filed the water contract draft at the same time. She had written the Belandi piece in under 90 minutes. It was sharp and warm, and it got the details right. The gallery lighting, the white linen, the particular familiarity of the crowd, and she had not used a single name that wasn't Nico Belandi's. She didn't need to. The piece was a portrait, and portraits, done correctly, show you everything in the room. She went home. Mark's car was in the driveway. She made herself a glass of water in the kitchen and went upstairs and lay down on her side of the bed while he slept, and she looked at the ceiling until it got light. Thursday morning, she drove to Trevor Hastings' office. He was in his mid-50s with a clean desk and a way of listening that felt like being held still. She laid everything out. The accounts, the insurance, the retirement fund documentation she'd printed from their joint portal at 5:51 p.m. Wednesday. The Vanguard email with its December timestamp. He looked at each document without rushing. When she was done, he folded his hands. "The email is useful," he said. "He told me he needed to come to my office to get that file," she said. "It hasn't been in my office for 11 months. He accessed it from home the week before he came to my office. I have the server log." Hastings wrote something down. "He was at my building for 11 minutes, she said. He took a blue folder from a cabinet with old story files. He was sweating." Hastings looked up. He said the file access timestamp and her personal documentation would establish the timeline cleanly. He asked if she had witnesses to the gallery event. She said she'd been alone but had filed a published piece within 24 hours that she could produce. He said that would do. She drove back across the bridge with the windows down and the radio off. She told Mark on Friday evening. Jonah was still at her mother's house, not expected back until Sunday. She waited until he was standing in the kitchen with a glass of water, comfortable, the day already concluding in his head. She came in from the hallway and set her keys on the counter and said, "I need you to know that I know about Nico Belandi." He went completely still. The glass was in his hand. He didn't put it down. She watched his face run through 4 things in fast succession. Confusion, recalculation, something that tried to look like innocence, and then a stillness that meant he'd decided to hear the rest before he spoke. "I saw you at the gallery Wednesday night," she said. "Meridian Gallery, Federal Street, 6 p.m. He said her name. "I'm not asking you to explain." Her voice was even. "I'm telling you that I've spoken to an attorney. His name is Trevor Hastings. I have an appointment Tuesday morning. You should get your own." He put the glass down. "Robin, I have Jonah until Sunday. We can work out the rest with attorneys present." He said, "It wasn't," and stopped. She picked up her keys. "I had a network offer 2 years ago," she said. "It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't trembling. It landed flat and clean as a date on a calendar. I made calls on your behalf to 3 clients and spoke to someone at Sentinel Savings about the refinancing terms. I never told you about any of that." She looked at him. "I kept it quiet because I didn't want you to feel like you owed me." His face changed. "I'm telling you now," she said, "because I want you to understand what was in the room while you were making other decisions." She walked out. She heard the glass hit the counter, and then the silence that followed, the silence of a man standing alone in a kitchen trying to add up numbers that will not balance. The near failure arrived the following Monday. She was at her desk with the water contract, 2 days from her Thursday deadline when her cell rang. Unknown number, which she answered out of habit. A man's voice, measured and formal, introduced himself as a partner at Grayfield & Associates. He said he was calling on behalf of Mark Whitfield. She wrote the name down and waited. He said that his client was prepared to dispute certain claims regarding the marital estate, specifically as they pertain to Cascade Analytics' revenue growth during the period in question. He said his client had documentation suggesting the business growth was attributable to his own professional efforts and market conditions, and that any claims regarding external support, his exact phrase, would be difficult to substantiate without records that did not exist. Robin let him finish. "Are you familiar with a contact named Patricia Sue at Elevance Partners?" she asked. A pause. "I'm sorry? Patricia Sue. She was the introduction I made in September, 3 years ago. She came on as a client 9 months later and remained a client through last fiscal year. She was already opening her email. I have the original message chain, sent from my personal account. The date is in the header." She heard him writing. "I also have a loan modification summary on Cascade's refinancing from Sentinel Savings. It has my name in the field labeled, referred by." She paused. "Your client may not have seen that section." There was a silence on the line that had weight to it. "I'll relay this to my client," he said. "Please do," she said, and ended the call. She set the phone down. Her hands were steady, the way they had been Wednesday at 6:22 when she dialed the first number. Outside, the third floor's windows showed clouds moving west over the city, fast and low, the kind that mean rain before evening. She turned back to the water contract and wrote 2 more paragraphs. She was at her desk Thursday afternoon when Anson stopped by and said the harbor piece was getting traffic. She nodded and thanked him, and he left. The piece had been picked up by 2 industry newsletters and a fashion trade publication. The comment section on Harbor's site had 12 entries, most of them from people who appeared to know exactly who had been standing in the gallery in a gray jacket with their arm around the founder. Robin had not read the comments. She didn't need to. She learned about the Belandi Collective account on Friday from a colleague who covered the business beat, who mentioned it in passing while they waited for the elevator. That Cascade Analytics had apparently lost a finalist client ahead of the Drummond Group announcement. Something about a conflict of interest issue. The details were unclear. The colleague didn't make the connection. Robin said that was too bad and stepped into the elevator. Mark called Saturday at noon. She was at her mother's house with Jonah, watching him kick a soccer ball across the backyard with the determined inefficiency of a 5-year-old who has decided he is very good at this. She answered because she'd told herself she would keep the communication lines open for Jonah's sake, and she intended to keep the commitments she made to herself. "The Drummond Group shortlist," he said. His voice had changed, not broken but thinner, like something structural had shifted inside it. "I know," she said. "They pulled us. Yesterday, something about..." He stopped. "There was a piece, I know," she said again. The silence after that was different from the kitchen silence. The kitchen silence had been the sound of calculation, him still looking for the equation that worked. This one was the sound of a man who had finished looking. She could hear him breathing. "I didn't know," he said. "About the Sentinel account. About Patricia." She watched Jonah miss the ball and look down at it with puzzled seriousness, then position himself again. "No," she said. "You didn't." "Robin, I'm with Jonah," she said. "Talk to Trevor Hastings' office about the schedule." She ended the call and put the phone in her pocket and went into the yard. Jonah looked up and asked if she'd seen his kick. She said she had, and it was excellent. He grinned, that whole face grin that took over everything, and turned back to the ball. What came through in the days that followed was not satisfaction. It was something quieter and more structural. The way a building feels after bad load-bearing work has been quietly replaced, the same from the outside, better in every way that mattered. She called the network on Monday. Not the same person she'd spoken to 2 years ago, but the contact was warm. The number still good. The person on the other end said they'd been wondering. She said she was ready to talk. She sat in Trevor Hastings' office Tuesday morning with the printed records in a folder and answered his questions and signed what he put in front of her. When she left, she stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the early air and looked at the street, the ordinary movement of it. Taxis and delivery trucks and a woman walking a dog and a man eating something out of a paper bag, and breathed in, and breathed out, and walked back to her car. Mark did not call again that week. She imagined him in the Cascade office on Chapel Street, sitting at the desk she had never actually sat at, looking at the Drummond Group communication in his email, then at the Belandi account file, then possibly at the business accounts they had opened jointly 7 years ago at Sentinel Savings, and finding her name in the referral field of a document he had never thought to read. She imagined the specific quality of that moment. The way a story looks different when you find the sentence you missed. She had experienced that moment in her own work enough times to know what it cost. She felt no pleasure in imagining it. She felt something that was adjacent to grief, and below that something harder and cleaner, like a floor she could stand on. She had built this floor. She had built it quietly, over years, without credit, without being asked. The difference now was only that she was standing on it alone. Jonah came home Sunday evening with mud on his shoes and a drawing he'd made at her mother's house. A house. 2 stick figures, a yellow sun, standard architectural program for a 5-year-old's universe. She hung it on the refrigerator with the same magnets that had been there for 3 years. He asked what was for dinner. She told him. He climbed onto the kitchen stool and leaned his chin on his hands and watched her, content in the way that children are content when the ordinary world holds. She kept her back to him for a moment, hands on the counter, looking at the wall. Then she turned around and started dinner. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in November, 14 months after the Meridian Gallery. Trevor Hastings texted at 2:47 p.m. The judge signed off. Robin read it standing in the Curry parking lot between 2 cars, the phone screen too bright in the autumn sun. She deleted the message and drove home. Posey was at her mother's until Sunday. The house on Elm Street was quiet, in a way that no longer felt like abandonment. Robin opened all the windows despite the cold, let the air move through rooms that had held their breath for too long. In the kitchen, she stood at the counter and made a sandwich, turkey, good mustard. The kind of careful attention to something small that she'd stopped bothering with when Mark was here. She ate it standing up, tasting each bite. The courier had reassigned her to features 6 months earlier. Theo Lindvist hadn't said it directly, but the water contract story had gone nowhere after Mark lost the Drummond Group account. Her source never called back. And 3 weeks later, the municipal bid went quietly through. She'd written the piece anyway, submitted it anyway, and watched it run on page 7. Now she wrote about the things that broke in ordinary ways. A community theater losing its lease, a tool and dye shop closing after 30 years. The small collapses that made the city what it was. The work was quieter. It suited her. Adrian Voss had left Portland in August. Robin learned this through the kind of accident that used to sting. She saw it mentioned in a design blog she was reading for a features pitch. Belandi Collective had relocated to Los Angeles. Nico had taken a position with a major retail firm. Adrian's name appeared nowhere in the announcement. The blog post included a photograph from the Meridian Gallery launch, the same night Robin had watched them. Nico stood alone, hand on her hip, the gray-jacketed figure cropped partially out of frame. Robin closed the browser and didn't think about it again. Mark had called in February, Posey's spring break. He wanted to switch weekends. She said yes without checking her calendar. He sounded smaller on the phone, less certain about the timing of his sentences. Cascade Analytics had downsized, he mentioned. They'd let 3 people go. He didn't say his own name wasn't among them, but the implication hung there. She told him Posey would be ready at 9 on Saturday and hung up. Patricia Sue had called in January. Patricia, who'd become a client of Cascade Analytics 9 months after Robin had quietly introduced her at a Sentinel Savings refinancing event 3 years ago. Patricia wanted to know if there was anything at all, that Robin needed. Patricia's voice had the kind of specific guilt that meant Mark had told her the truth about how those connections had been made, and by whom. Robin said there was nothing and thanked her and meant it. By October, the house felt like hers in a way it never had before. She repainted Posey's room, not a different color, the same color, but she did it herself. And the walls held the mark of her own hand. She hung 3 photographs, one of Posey at 5, gap-toothed and laughing, one of her mother and her on the porch, squinting into sun, one of the Courier building at dusk, its windows lit like a ship at sea. She stood back and looked at them and felt the particular quiet that comes from choosing what to see. The piece on the community theater ran in September. It was good work. The kind that didn't try to save anything, just held it clearly for a moment before letting it go. She won a regional journalism award for it in November, the same month the divorce finalized. Theo called her into his office and told her she'd been nominated. She said thank you. He said she'd done good work and that he'd been glad to have her stay 6 years ago when she could have left. She understood what he meant without him saying it more clearly. She left his office and went back to her desk and continued reporting. In December, Cascade Analytics filed for Chapter 11. Robin didn't see the announcement until a colleague forwarded it with no comment. The firm had lost 17% of its client base in the 12 months following the Drummond Group contract termination. There were other reasons listed in the filing: market contraction, operational costs, a senior account executive who'd left suddenly. But the dominoes were visible if you knew how to read them. Mark had built the company on relationships. He'd let one relationship destroy everything. Robin read the filing once and filed it mentally in the place where she kept information that was no longer her responsibility. She didn't hate him anymore. That was the thing she hadn't expected. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the particular freedom of indifference. She could think about Mark's face without any feeling at all. The way you might regard a photograph of a stranger. He had made his choice. He had made it repeatedly. With his hands and his body and his lies about files he didn't need. He had chosen something other than what they had built, and when she'd looked directly at that choice, reflected in the moment of him turning away, she'd understood that staying would have been a kind of suicide. On a Tuesday in late December, Posey asked if they could make cookies without measuring anything. They stood in the kitchen together, throwing in flour and sugar by eye. The kind of casual destruction that her mother would have organized into fractions. The dough came out slightly wrong, too dense in some places, too loose in others. They baked it anyway. The cookies spread unevenly, burned on the edges, and Posey laughed at how bad they looked. They ate 3 each standing at the counter. They tasted like butter and imprecision and the specific happiness of someone who had stopped waiting to be told how to live. That night, Posey was asleep by 8. Robin sat on the couch with a manuscript from a writer who'd submitted a personal essay about her own marriage ending. The prose was rough in places, honest everywhere. Robin made notes in the margins, not corrections, but invitations to go deeper. She worked until almost midnight, and when she stopped, her hand was steady. The coffee ring on her notepad from that last day at the Courier office. The day Mark came to the building and lied and changed everything. That ring had long since faded. The notepad itself had been thrown away in March. But she remembered it sometimes, the way a small dark stain marks the place where something spilled. She didn't reach for it. She didn't need to. She just kept moving, kept writing, kept letting the days accumulate into something that resembled a life again.
If you made it this far, you already know why this channel exists. See you tomorrow.